Welcome to the Speak Like a Leader podcast with John Bates.
Welcome to the show. With me today, I have someone whom I met fairly recently. We met again fairly recently. And right before we met in Dubai, I had been in the UK, and we actually went out of our ways enough to meet up in the UK before. And he's someone that, honestly, when I met him, I was like, wait a minute, dude, have you been following me and stealing my stuff? Because we both have such a similar view on the world and we both do such similar things. And it just turns out that I think we're brothers from another mother. And so, Mark, I am really, really happy to have you here. Mark Leruste is a keynote speaker on human connection. He's the CEO of Storycast. He's a leadership communication expert. He's a best-selling author of the book Glow in the Dark, and he is an absolutely great, great guy. Welcome to the show, Mark.
Thank you so much, John. I appreciate you. And it's just been wild to think that we only met up for the first time in 2024 and that we got to hang out in London and Dubai, which I'm sure we'll get into in a second. But I just wanted to give a shout out. Look, double book promo. I've got the whole book too for anybody watching this.
That's awesome.
Really, I'll tell you what, just straight off the bat, I just want to acknowledge you for always having on you a bunch of your books and a bunch of your pens. I don't want to ruin the trick that you demonstrate when you give someone a pen, but I've seen you do this multiple times now. And when you navigate circles and you kind of like want to gift something of value to people, you give them a copy of your book. And I just want to acknowledge you for that because I love that about you.
Well, thank you very, very much. I appreciate it. And I have to admit, like one of my love languages, I think, is gifts. So I think everybody likes that stuff as much as I do. And I get not everybody's is into it, but thank you for that. Cause I definitely, I feel seen and heard, and I do try and bring that around to give people value. And I was really, really stoked and honored that you brought me one of your books. And, so real quickly, just to loop back to the beginning, we were brought together by a guy named Sebastian Bates, who is not a relation of mine that we know of, but he's another brother from another mother, right? And he's got a foundation called the Bates Foundation that we are both patrons of. And that's how we got together in Dubai, was at a patrons retreat for his foundation. And they go into some of the most underserved communities on the planet and teach kids, often orphans, about martial arts with the goal of teaching them good values and teaching them to, how to overcome bullying and teaching them things like integrity and resilience and all of that. And it is an amazing program. Yeah. So it's the Bates Foundation.
It's interesting because, the small anecdote is a few years ago, I was a judge on a pitching contest where I first met Seb, and he was pitching for the Warrior Academy. I think the Bates Foundation might've been started. I'm not quite sure, but anyway. And I remember specifically, I gave him the highest mark, but I gave the next up 0.5 point difference. And the second one ended up winning the whole competition. And I felt so bad because I basically told her, I was like, I think I just cost you the competition. I feel so bad about it. But that's when the relationship started. And then I saw him on stage talk at the Lifestyle Summit, an event organized by Dent Priestley's team, Dent Global. And I saw him on stage. And so I had seen the before and I had seen the after, and he was unbelievable on stage. He had the whole room in his hands. He shared this incredible, powerful story about how he overcame this huge accident when he was jumping off a cliff and his parachute didn't come off, and how he built his family. Like, just really, really great. People were in tears. People were queuing up after. And I went up to him and I said, dude, what happened? Because I saw the first version and this is very different. And he basically was like, yes, I worked with this coach, with this sort of speaker communication coach called John Bates. and he's amazing. And that was the first time your name came up. And so then when he launched the Patron Foundation membership club, so basically the first 10 or 20 founding members of the foundation who got together to put some money into the foundation to make it more sustainable. And I saw your name there. I got really excited. And so when I came to London, I was like, dude, and I think you said, like, I'm coming over to London. Any of the foundation patrons around? And I was like,
Yes,
dude, let's do it. Like, and we met up. And so anyway, that's the background story of how two, storytellers came together and got to exchange each other's books.
Yeah, which is fantastic. Thank you. That's such a great story. I'm really happy. I mean, dude, the guy has such a story, right? So we'll have to put a link to the foundation and everything in the show notes. Well, so I when we met, I said, I got to get you on the podcast. We got to talk about things. And, people who know me really well, I'm just going to read you a few of the things in Glow in the Dark. And I'm pretty sure that Mark was not following me and copying everything I did. So I have to admit that I'm not the only one who came up with this stuff. But listen to the contents of this book. Part 1, why your story is your secret weapon to success. Right. And then you talk about the power of being authentic. You talk about how people buy from people. You talk about the power of story, the benefits of sharing your story, the story blockers, which are things that get in the way. And then you talk about your origin story, your $1 million asset. And I love that you call it that, because that's, I tell people, I think your origin story is your most important story out of all the stories that you could focus on and perfect. Giving people an insight into you through your origin story is just paramount, a tantamount, is like the number one. And so, like, I guess it's kind of obvious when you think about it, but we both use the Spider-Man story, right? And one of the things that I've noticed, and I saw it in your book too, is that I used to think about the Spider-Man story. I used to think that the big deal was he got bit by a spider, right? By a radioactive spider, back when radioactivity was magic. And it turned him into this gave him all these superpowers. But that's not really what made him Spider-Man, right? Tell the story of what actually made Peter Parker become Spider-Man.
Well, I don't know if are you referring to his to his uncle, to his grandfather that year. So I think, one of the misconceptions of origin stories is that they're only related to, sort of comic books and superheroes and stuff. But actually it's finding the humanity in those origin stories that make us think. It's, in fact, I think I talk about it in my book. It's one of the reasons why Joker with Joaquin Phoenix was such a success. It's because it actually gave a human side to this evil, sort of nemesis character. Yeah. And in Spider-Man's case, what happens is that, spoiler alert, if anybody hasn't read the comic book or seen the movie,
skip
put
ahead
pause. Skip ahead a little. But the idea is that Peter Parker, who's a kind soul, effectively lets this person run away, and this person ends up
after he has his superpowers, right? He sees a crime in progress and thinks it's not my problem.
Yes, and he lets it go, and I think it's his grandfather.
I think it's his Uncle Ben.
Uncle, that's it. That's
right?
Uncle Ben.
Yeah.
And he basically ends up getting killed by this burglar. Same guy. Yeah, same guy. So then Peter Parker feels responsible for this event. And I think on his dying words, he basically says kind of like, with great responsibility comes great power. Or great power comes great responsibility.
With great power comes great responsibility.
Yeah. And that shapes it because, I think Donald Miller says it best. He says, the difference between heroes and villains is that typically they've both been through stuff and they've both had to overcome difficult stuff, little T traumas or big T traumas. The difference between both is how they deal with that pain. So in a hero's case, it's usually, I want to make sure nobody has to experience this pain. So I'm going to do whatever it takes to protect the world. Whereas villains is, I want everybody else to feel my pain so they can feel and know what I feel like.
Yeah. That's really, really good. And, like before that happened, Peter Parker was thinking about taking his superpowers and joining the circus because he wanted to make lots of money so he could buy Aunt Em and Uncle Ben a new house because he loved them so much, right? And then he has that moment when he doesn't take action and lets that criminal get away, and then that criminal kills his uncle, and that is why, plus that, with great power comes great responsibility. He's like, oh my gosh. And he goes and becomes Spider-Man. Right before that, he was just Peter Parker with a superpower and like no direction. Right. And so, so here's one of the things that I say, I'd love to see what you think about this, Mark, is that, so I'll just unpack the whole thing and then let's jump into it. So I tell people, because you and I work with people who are already experts and they're already doing quite well, and I tell them, you don't have to establish your credibility. That's pretty much already established because you're on the stage, you have the card that says VP of this or CEO or whatever. So your credibility is fundamentally established on some level. What you really need to do up front is establish your emotional credibility. And I think that a well-told origin story does that. What do you think?
Yeah, I think the purpose of a strategic origin story well told is to establish trust, right? Like that's the first thing you want to try and establish with someone because
Yes.
whether you're trying to sell an idea or a product or service, it's the same thing. People buy from people they know, like, and trust. And so
Yeah.
in a really noisy digital world, where we're bombarded by over 3,000 commercial messages a day, and our ability to retain information is very finite. I think one way that we can stick in people's minds and hearts and compel them to take action is through sharing a well-crafted origin story. And I think that's what it is. And it's, I talk about this quite a lot on LinkedIn, and a lot of people kind of, reflect back on this. I often say that, one of the differences between sharing, a personal story in a strategic way versus sharing a personal story and say in a way of like in a therapy session is the intention, right? It's kind
Yes.
of like you've got to learn how to take the parts that are relevant about your story, that are relevant to your audience, the particular audience that you're talking to, so you can connect the dots. Because otherwise, what can happen, and this is a lot of leaders who listen to this might be asking themselves, like, okay, but how do I know what parts of my story are relevant, right? And like how much is too much sharing, and or am I undersharing? Like they've got a lot of these questions. And to that, I often say, your story sharpens as you share. And I know it's not a sexy thing to say, but it's like the more you practice it, the more you hone it, the more you see what lands. And so in that particular context, you can have a one line or a one sentence origin story. I think that's where people, get confused. You can, if you've only got a few seconds to introduce yourself, because maybe you're on a stage or you're a shareholder, reunion meeting, or that you're being on a podcast, on a panel, you're going to have various amounts of time to introduce yourself. And if you're in a long format podcast of 2 or 3 hour interview, you can go in depth into your backstory and dig out loads of elements and details, and that's great. But sometimes you've only got like a couple of sentences just to sort of establish as to why you do what you do and why you care and why people should care.
Yeah. I mean, and I think that just to be really clear, when we say a well-crafted, intentional origin story, we're not talking about an inauthentic origin story. I think sometimes people get a little like resistant because of something like that shows up in their mind. And no. It's your real, genuine, authentic origin story. It's just that origin story, as you said, guided by your intention. What is it that your audience needs to know? What is going to benefit them to know out of all that stuff that you could talk about that's your origin story? What is the stuff that's going to really matter to them, that's authentic and real, but that's crafted in a way that's going to capture their attention? And, it's Sebastian, right? You saw the difference between his presenting before and his presenting after. And what we really did together is hone his origin story so that he could tell a story that actually happened, that was actually really like full of drama and all this stuff, and tell it in a way that was going to bring that out for people and take them into his experience versus just being a book report about it. And it was highly authentic, and it was very crafted and very intentional. And that just really works.
Yeah, 100%. And I think where people get confused, or sometimes this can be a bit of relief to hear, is that you can have multiple stories, right? Like you can go to your
Yes.
origin story and you can basically pick like, hey, there are these different avenues that I could go down. And depending on which audience I'm speaking to, depending on what message I'm trying to land, and depending on what action I want people to take out of this, I'm going to pick the best, most suited story for this event. So the analogy that I often use is like a vending machine.
Yeah.
And so one of the powers of unpacking your story and learning how to shape your story, it's what I go through in Glow in the Dark, is that when someone asks you a question or when you're going to introduce yourself, you can literally go into your mind, oh, that's B12, pull out that story, and that's okay. Like you don't have to say all the stories at once. It's almost too overwhelming, right? Like it's almost like if you walk down the streets and you see like a clothes shop, what you see on the window is a really lovely curated outfit that makes you go, hey, that looks cool. Let me see what else is in there. And then you go inside, then you've got all the shelves of all the clothes. But if the shop had put all the jeans or all the skirts or shirts or what have you on the window, you'd be like, that looks like too much. I'm not even going to engage because my brain's just shutting off. And it's the same thing.
Exactly. That's perfect. Yes, I concur 100%. And then, you also, so this is a great book and I recommend it, Glow in the Dark. And this is what you do. You help people bring their stories out in a way that's going to forward their action, so to speak. Yeah. So what are some of the things that you, like, if I asked you, what's one of the things that you see getting in people's way the most, what would come to mind?
That's a great question. So actually, I'm going to do a sort of a helicopter meta view here, and I'm going to answer with a sort of an origin story, so people listening to this can see how it's used in practice. So you ask me that question, I go to like C15. That's the story, right? So actually, I've been hosting a podcast since 2015 called The Unconventionalists, and one of the things that I was amazed of interviewing, hundreds of really interesting and inspiring people, was that there was these two sort of camps. One of them was they had a very well curated story. If I asked them a question about why they were doing what they were doing, they had this really kind of compelling narrative. And the other camp was more like, didn't really know about the background story's power, but I sort of got it out of them. And at the end, I would often ask them, like, have you ever shared that story before? And they'd say, no. And I would say, but why? And they would give me a series of answers. And over time, I started collecting a lot of data around the reasons why people don't share the stories. And what I realized is that the camp that had this very well curated story, most of them were North Americans, by the way. Most of them were American. And they'd been through the lots of different podcast interviews, but they were more of a minority. Most of the people just had no idea how powerful their story was. In fact, I always say, if you knew how powerful your story was, you wouldn't be sitting on it. And so I curated those answers as to why we don't share a story. And I came up with 9 story blockers. They're in the book. One of the chapters where I kind of identify which story block is getting in your way. And I'm only going to share a couple, but one of them in particular that I think really gets in the way in terms of when you ask me, like, what are some of the things that gets in the way of a leader or someone in a team to kind of use their story to connect with those around them, be it their customers or their team members, is that they don't see how their story is interesting, exciting, or relevant. And the reason being is that they might say, look, I don't have a Hollywood story. I don't have this tragic background. I didn't go through this, huge trauma. So I don't really think I've got anything worthwhile to share. And the analogy that I compare this to is that, and maybe John, if you don't mind humoring me for the sake of your audience, and if I can use you as my guinea pig, what's one of your favorite films?
I mean, what pops to mind immediately, because I've been reading it to my son and then we watch the movies, is The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings,
Yeah, cool. So what is it about The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings that you love or enjoy?
Well, I love the broad scope of it, and I love the like in the book, the descriptive language, and in the
Mm,
movies, the gorgeous scenery. But what I really love is like it's The Hobbit. Like you're gonna make me cry. Like I love Johnny seeing at age 8 that little
mm,
Bilbo Baggins and little
mm,
Frodo Baggins who aren't big kings with huge swords or wizards or whatever. Like they hold the key and they got to go deal with their fear and be courageous. Wow, it's really
mm,
trippy that this made me so emotional.
mm,
But yeah, that's
mm.
what I love about that, you know?
And it creates an emotional reaction in you when you think of it and when you
Yeah,
watch it. The story of
yeah,
the underdog,
yeah,
the one who wants to go on an adventure, the reluctant hero, right?
yeah.
I'm going to assume you've seen this film more than once. Would that be
Yes,
accurate? Maybe you've seen this
I
film a couple of
actually
times.
have. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So, chances are the first time you saw it, you were probably just amazed and like in this magical world. Then you saw it a second, third, fourth time. Maybe now you see it through the eyes of your kids, so the magic returns. But now let me ask you this. If I put you in a room and you had snacks and the rest room and everything, so you'd be sorted that way. But you had to sit down and watch The Hobbit, not once, not twice, but 100 to 1,000 times back to back. How long do you think it would take before you start getting really bored and want to stab yourself with a blunt spoon?
I mean, I could probably watch it a few times back to back, but 100 to 1,000,
That,
it
yeah,
doesn't sound great, you
it
know?
doesn't sound great. Well, here's the
No.
thing. It's the same thing with your story. You're so close to it. You've seen it so many times that for you it's boring, it's irrelevant, and that's because you're suffering this concept called proximity bias. You're too
Yeah,
close to something to see its own value. Whereas someone who's never heard your story for the first time, it's like someone seeing The Hobbit or The Lord of the Rings for the first time. For them, it's magical. And I think
yep,
we forget that. We forget that actually we are the worst judges
yeah,
to identify whether a story is relevant or interesting or not. So
yeah,
that would be like straight out the bat. I would say that is one of the biggest things that I kind of change. And then the second thing I think is a lot of people who are, you and I probably speak to and work with, we're talking about leaders who've managed to create some sort of success and impact within their organizations and teams, is that they don't want to be the center of attention.
yeah,
They don't want
yep,
to make it all about them. Like they're very much adamant about, no, I want it to be about my team and my product and my customers. And I'm like, yes, great. But here's the thing. Your story is about you, but it's not for you, right? And I'll say that again. Your story is about you, but it's not for you. It's for the people you're trying to serve because your story has the possibility to change someone's trajectory and transform their life. Because by hearing your story, they can feel a sense of hope. They can feel like they're not alone. And so your story becomes a vehicle for a message. It's not about making you the hero, right? We both believe in this. Donald Miller and Nancy Duarte was one of the first to talk about this on the TED stage, that the audience is the hero, right?
yep.
Us as storytellers, as leaders, as we're the guides, we're not the heroes. So those two things are typically things that I kind of cover, but there's 9 in total.
Yeah.
But I'm sure you've got a few juicy ones too.
Yeah, no, those are great. And I think those are two of the biggest ones. And it is really funny because I agree. And I've heard myself say to my clients over and over and over, you know, it's about you. Like the story is
Mm,
about you, but you're
yes,
telling it for them. The goal
yes,
is to open something up and connect and allow them to see into you and find something over there in you that they have in them. And that's a hard concept for people to
yeah,
get past. I mean, Mark, when I trained the astronauts, the first time that I did a big training at NASA, and it wasn't for the astronauts yet, but there were 2 astronauts in the training, and they're
mm,
the ones who ended up bringing me into the astronaut office. But after the training, these 2 guys came up and said, "Hey, that was great. We really want to get you into the astronaut office, but that part about telling our stories and talking about ourselves. Well, we don't want to talk about ourselves because it's not about us. It's about the
mm,
taxpayers who make what we do possible."
mm,
And I felt like I was talking to Captain America, and it was, and I actually almost laughed out loud because it was just so cute, and so
mm,
expected. And I said to them, you guys, I totally get it. And I know you're sincere. Like, I know I'm kind of giggling over here, but I get that you're sincere about that. But here's what you got to understand. You get to go up there and do that. And I'm back here on earth paying for it. And I want to know everything. Like if you have a perfect moment, or if you have an insight, or if you screw something up and you learn a lesson, or if you're scared, like I want to know all those things. And it's not about you. It's about me, the taxpayer, and that's obvious when it comes
And it's
to
also, so
astronauts.
if I can jump in, I think it's also
Yep.
about the little girl or the little boy who's out there and who hears these stories and who then sees themselves in the stories of the astronaut and can dream,
Absolutely it
of
is.
becoming. I think it's also it's the kind of the ripple effect gift that a lot of people
Yeah.
don't realize about
Yeah.
sharing your stories. That sometimes you'll move someone, you'll touch someone that you're not even aware of, right? Like it's really interesting. Just I don't know why I'm thinking about this, but so I'm quite active on LinkedIn. For the moment,
Yes.
I've been posting every single day for a certain number of weeks. Don't recommend it to anybody; it's terrible. But one thing that's been really interesting is that my engagements aren't massive, and I don't get that many comments or reshares and stuff like that. But one thing that happens, I'll get a message in my DM by someone saying, "Hey, I just want you to know that I've been really enjoying your posts lately, particularly about this thing." So people pay attention, and you might not even know about it. You know what I mean? And so
Absolutely.
sometimes you've got to be willing to sort of shoot in the dark and hope for the
Yep.
best a little bit, as long as you know that you're coming from a place of service.
Yeah. Well, and it's easy to see that we would want to know about astronauts, right? Because they're doing something interesting
Mm,
and exciting.
mm,
And then people go, "Oh, well, but I'm not an astronaut." Okay,
mm,
but you're a human being. And we are
mm,
so interested in human beings. We just want to hear stories. And if you think about it, think of all the time we spend watching TV, which is basically a whole bunch of stories that are made up about human beings, right? And
mm,
those are just made up stories. The only thing that's more interesting to us than those made up stories are the real stories of the real people in our
mm,
lives. And
mm,
I think I heard in what you said something that I think is really important, especially for leaders and people who want to influence and people who want to make a difference. If you're not telling your stories,
mm,
then those experiences that you've had are only helping you. Those places
mm.
where you've screwed up and learned a lesson, or where you've had a deep insight, or something happened that taught you the value of a principle that you hold dear.
Mm.
If you're not telling those stories, then they only help you. But the
Yeah,
minute
and
you tell those stories, they get leveraged across everybody that just heard them.
yes, and what I also know to be true is that there's this dilemma that happens inside of all of us, which is if the fear outweighs the reward, right? If the
Mm,
risk outweighs the reward, at least our perception of,
yeah.
then it feels too risky to pursue, right? And
Yeah.
so what I mean by this is that a lot of leaders, um, a lot of people who are trying to have influence and impact others, they've also got this belief that I need to sort of control a lot of my appearance and a lot of my sort of masks and shield. And I get why. Like I'm not saying that I don't get why. We can get into the whole biology around it, but what I do find interesting is that what I've come to see and believe is that actually giving yourself the permission to be imperfect in public makes you more influential. And a lot of people struggle with that concept. And again, this is not about bleeding emotionally on stage. It's not therapy. It's not about dumping all your crap on other people there.
Yeah.
And it's also having the humility to be able to show your humanity, to effectively say, look, I know you may have this perception of me because of my role, because of where I am, because of kind of what I've achieved or what I'm doing. But the truth is, there have been stuff along the way that have been really difficult, challenging. And one of the reasons why I want to share some of those things is that you can, there's almost like sort of two folds. It's like, first of all, I want you to be able to recognize yourself in these challenges and maybe get a sense of hope as to, what you can achieve or do or overcome. And the other thing is, this is a big theme that I see leaders that I work with on a one-to-one, is that they come to me often and they're like, I just don't think my team really know me. Or I just don't think that, when I go up on stage, people are like, oh my God, you're amazing. But they have no idea how much I'm holding back. Like, I feel a bit like I'm navigating this fraudster kind of identity. And like, there's these two people in the mirror. There's the professional self and the personal self. And I just want to give people the option who want to, because not everybody has to, but who want to be able to be the same person at home as at work. That's one of the sort of gifts of freedom, is when you're no longer afraid of what people know about you or hold against you. And I think that's some of the work, some of the deeper work, that's a lot of the stuff I talk about, Glow in the Dark. It's this
Chapter
concept of,
1, hello,
yeah,
my name is Imposter.
yeah, yeah, right. And it's on a sort of more, sort of legacy work, I guess. One thing that really gets to me is this idea that we all have these incredible stories, whether we see them or not, that holds so much wisdom and hope. And most of us go to our grave with our stories untold. And I think that's like a huge tragedy. I think that's just
Yeah.
really, really sad, really, because again, you've gone through stuff, and there's a reason why you went through that stuff. And it may not be easy or pretty stuff, but I'll tell you what, anytime I've been in a situation where, and I do this with teams. So, I work with individuals, but also work with Fortune 500 brands, like you,
Yep.
like companies.
Yep.
And, when I work with teams to try and create human connection within a team and create more trust and connection, collaboration, we go through some of these exercises that I talk about in my book, around sharing, your river of life and some of the things that shaped who you are. And it's really interesting because you go from resistance to suddenly surrender, and you see
Yeah.
people discover things. Like, I remember this one particular team I worked with, it was insurance brokers. I met with all the MDs and CEOs of this huge group. We were in a room and we spent a day together, and we went through this one particular exercise, and these two kind of saw their look on their face, and I was like, hey, do you want to share what this exercise was like? And he said, I've been working with so-and-so for 7 years, and I never knew this about them. Like, in the
Yes.
last 20 minutes, I've learned more about them than I have in 7 years.
Yeah.
And I thought that was wild. Like, I thought that was so wild. And I know it happens all the time. I remember this group I was coaching, and this one particular individual, this was years ago. This is almost 8 years ago. And I remember this particular individual said to me, and he said, you'll never believe this, but I was recently asked by my manager if my wife was coming to the annual ball or something like that. And he's like, I'm gay and I've been with my partner for like 7 years. And she's been my boss for 5 of those years. And she's never asked me about my partner. She never even,
Yep.
and I just thought, wow, that's like so interesting that we can spend 90,000 hours of our life working in an environment in which we don't even know who the person is next to us.
Yeah. I mean, that's definitely one of the things that I'm secretly in the background trying to do with all of my work.
Mm,
And that's why one of the things that I just always do, probably like you, is work with people on their origin stories when
mm,
I do those group trainings. It's one of the
mm,
non-negotiables as we go through that. And people, because like, you're exactly right. Like, how is it functional to go through most of your life, which is at work, like discounting, like taking out sleep,
mm,
which, you're sleeping, like, how is it functional to go through most of your life, like with this wall up and like not, and it doesn't,
mm,
it doesn't work at work, and it doesn't help anybody, and it doesn't make anyone feel more loved and more gotten and more known. And it doesn't, like, to, to to just not know that stuff and not share that stuff with each other is not helping anything. But we get so trained to think that we shouldn't,
yeah.
and
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 also,
it's true. Like,
yeah.
you don't want to overshare, like, I get that,
Mm,
but to really know each other, and and I want to hear what you were going to say, but I just want to say
mm,
something about what you said. These people who come to you and say my team doesn't know me. I worked with a group. I mean, I still work with them, but the first engagement that I got with this very big tech group, like, it's huge. And the woman who ran HR for that group came to me and said, John, we've got this guy. We want to take him from VP level to C level. over the whole global organization, but people don't feel like they know him. Like he's really competent. People really like him. He's very good at his job, but he holds his cards so close to his chest
Tightly.
that people don't feel like they know him. And here's what she said that I thought was so profound and it's so easy to miss. She said, people want to know their leaders. And I was like, ooh, that's good.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yes. I mean, obviously, I think, especially I think you and I are going to agree on many things since
Yes,
you're like a brother, I mean, like your brother from another storyteller. Like,
yeah.
Now, the thing I was going to say was I also want to acknowledge that there are certain marginalized communities who are navigating a world in which they don't even feel safe showing up, let alone bringing their stories. And I
Yes.
just want to say that because, through various workshops and masterclasses and talks and keynotes that I've delivered, I've had the opportunity to be schooled and to be told a lot of my sort of blind spots, that I'm unaware of as the way that I navigate the world as a cisgender heterosexual white male. And there are communities in which, equity seeking communities that have to already find the courage to show up because of the way they look, the way that they love, the way that they, believe, whatever. Then on top of that is difficult. So I'm just saying that because that's like a level, that's a level added pressure. And, it's really weird to say this out loud in a way, because the best work that fulfills me the most is when I, there's two things: is when I deliver keynotes, because I get to sort of share a message I really believe in at scale, and I can hopefully impact some people in the room. The other one is working on a one-to-one with people, because what you see is, and I think you and I talked about this when we were on the bus, I was telling us like, man, like how do you sell this message of like human connection, the keynote, or all this kind of stuff at work? And you were like, you basically give them what they want. No, you say you sell them what they want, you give them what they need. That's the whole premise. Like we talk about leadership communication, but we also then talk about origin stories. And it's this idea that when people change their relationship to their story, everything changes. Like I can't tell you the amount of time that people came to me, they were ashamed, they were scared, they were afraid of parts of their story, whether that's because they messed up, because something happened to them, because that they saw something, like whatever it is, it has such an emotional charge to it. And as we navigate those stories and we learn how to curate them, shape them, and share them in a way that is both compelling and helpful, it completely changed the way they navigate the world. This has happened again and again and again and again. And I think one of the tricks we do, you and I, is to find the universal truth and value of a very specific and individual story. The story of Seb, of him like jumping off this cliff, and it's like, I don't know, his 10th jump of the day, and it all goes terribly wrong.
He used to jump off and fly around in the squirrel suits, right?
Yeah, that's it. Free, I don't know what they call, like absolute nutters
or something.
Yeah, free. That's it. Yeah, jump base. That's it. Free, whatever it is.
Base jumping.
But base jumping. There we go.
Freebasing.
Freebasing.
Not that. Yeah.
Free bagging.
Although I kind of think you'd have to maybe freebase before you base jump. It's what a scary thing,
Yeah, but the point is, it's such an extraordinary story. The same way that when I work, Daniel Coster-Gill is a client of mine who's doing this incredible work now as a keynote speaker. His story is truly unbelievable, like Netflix documentary, like amazing. And it's about finding the point of connection that your audience can see themselves in, and to really land the plane as to what the message. And I think, I don't know if you've experienced this, but one of the things that I often see with, and I put air quote, inspirational speakers who've got these really incredible stories, is that it can sometimes miss the point. And that is like, they share these incredible stories, but you're kind of going like, wow, what an incredible person. But that's kind of how you leave. You don't leave thinking like, oh, I am an incredible person too, and I have what it takes to achieve X.
Yes.
And that's where, like, I'd like to point people listening to this or watching this, is this idea of like, no matter how you feel about your story, whether you've got this extraordinary story, whether you think you have a very ordinary story, the point is there's always something you can draw out of your story that someone can relate to, see themselves in, and find hope.
Yes. And, and I find that some of the most impactful stories are those stories from people who would argue that they are very ordinary.
Yeah.
Because that's someone that anybody can relate to. And when they have this experience that may not be Hollywood worthy or something, but is very real and draws out a meaningful lesson or principle or something, like that's even more relatable, you know?
Yes. My friend Mike Pacione always says relatable, not remarkable.
Yeah.
And I love that.
Yeah. I mean, that's one of the challenges that these people with remarkable stories like Seb have, right?
Yeah.
Like if they don't play it right and take that into account, then people can't connect. People think, oh yeah, he has something I don't have. And they just are gone before.
And this happens. Like I had a client once years ago come to me and he wanted to help better connect when he talked on stages. And so we start going through his story and he just like basically excelled at pretty much anything he did. Like when he was a kid, he was like a choir boy that did like a record. He had like a gold record. That means that they sold like 100,000 copies. He then was like a Team GB, under 21 athlete. He then goes into the army and like gets like one of the highest decorations, Secret Service commander, like just unbelievable.
Yeah.
And I was just scratching my head. I was like, there's something, and I'm not quite catching it. So I ask him more questions. I go like, tell me about your childhood. And we start talking about child. And then he tells me this story of basically how he lived in a household with a violent father who had, substance abuse and how he used to put himself between his dad and his mom and sister to protect them. And I was like, well, there it is. I mean, that's why you are the one when the helicopter gets shot down. This is a true story. When the helicopter gets shot down, you're the first one to grab the people around you and stay super calm when everybody's like panicking. Or, literally if you sit with him at a bar and there's a fight that breaks out, before you have time to turn around, he's already jumped over the fence to try and go see what's going on. And I said to him, I was like, have you ever shared the story? And he was like, no, and I never will. And we got talking about it and we unpacked it. And I said, look, I'm not here to tell you what you should or shouldn't do. Ultimately, it's your story and, it's not ready until it's ready. But let me tell you this, that's the emotional glue that you've been looking for, that people will relate to you, because otherwise you're just Superman. Like it's like Superman hasn't got kryptonite. We're not interested. Like the only reason why we if Superman didn't have kryptonite, it'd be too much. Like we wouldn't find the humanity in him. The fact that we're all vulnerable in a certain way. So anyway, to close the story, a year later, I kid you not, I think it was about a year later, he sends me an email and he goes, I was finally ready. And it's a link to a podcast. And he was interviewed on this podcast. That particular podcast went on to win an award for one of the best podcast interviews. And he shared his story and he opened up about, and now I've seen him since. He's invited me to sit on some of his keynotes and he'll share a story. And it's not like a big deal. Like he doesn't make this huge sort of drama about it. He just introduces it in his, he kind of links as to why he does what he does today. And I think that's the incredible power of going through this, is that suddenly it's like the weight that it used to carry and the way that it used to put you in a prison of shame.
Yes.
It can shift and you can, I often say from shame to service.
Yeah.
And that's
really good.
There's a chapter you'll see in the book that, that's what it's all about.
Well, and
and I'm aware of time. I want to be respectful of time, because everybody listening to this and watching this, you don't know this, but I was like 10 minutes late. I was shabby. I was sweating all day. I was building furniture because we just renovated. This, by the way, you've got an exclusive, John. This is the very first interview I've given in my new office. So this is all new.
Look at that.
I still haven't figured out how to set it up. Yeah. So it's
it's great. I mean, I see glow in the dark right over your shoulder there. Very good. I also like the little mustache thing and,
Yeah.
Well, and thanks for taking a shower and showing up well kempt. I took a shower, but I'm not as well kempt as you are.
No, that's because I am vain. I am so vain, John. That's the only reason
well, at least you know. So, I love that shame to service. And it reminds me of something that I got taught that really made a huge difference for me, which is that what you resist persists. And acknowledgement causes disappearance. And so no matter who you are, no matter how, because you're right, like there are a lot of marginalized people who just like it takes courage to just show up, much less tell
Mm.
their actual authentic story. And I've seen people in that situation, like you just said, go from shame to service and go
Mm.
from resisting to just accepting and acknowledging, and the freedom that that brings and the power that
Mm.
that brings. And it has to be done thoughtfully and it has to be done the right way. But I've just seen that many times.
Yeah.
And I do think that's a great place for us to wrap up is
Mm.
if for no other reason, sharing your story and getting it really well crafted and intentionally told gives you the power to own that story
Mm.
and make a difference, not just for everyone else, but for yourself.
Yeah. 100%. You know, that's why my coaching program is called Own Your Story,
Yeah.
because, you know, it's again, you know, obviously I'm going to drink the Kool-Aid. You're drinking the same
Yeah.
Kool-Aid. We want everybody
We're
drinking
here.
the
It's a
same
Kool-Aid
Kool-Aid.
party. Yeah.
You know, it's a Kool-Aid party. And it's like, it really is unbelievable. You know, Emily Gindelsberger, who's an amazing author and a memoir sort of coach, you know, she wrote this incredible book and she talks a lot about this. Like, she's a great person to follow on LinkedIn. You know, she talks a lot about the emotional process of sharing your story and talking about your story. And I think I in one of my keynotes that I give, I end up with this quote. I'm going to forget it now because obviously I haven't prepared for this, but it's Anne Lamott. She basically says something like, you know, if you're afraid of offending people when you share your story, don't. You know, if they wanted you to write kindly about them, they should have behaved better.
That's okay. That's good. That's good. That's good. Well, so I think that we can both agree that it's important to tell your stories and share your stories, and that it can and I think that you will love Glow in the Dark. Go find, I got to assume, is it on Amazon? Like mine was handed to me by the author.
Yeah,
So
yeah, you can get it pretty much in any book, any kind of way, any way you buy your books. It's on
yeah,
Amazon. If it's out of stock, then they'll restock at some point. And
yeah.
anybody listening to this and interested in finding out about where they are on their journey, they can go to storycast.co. There's a test you can take there. It's a quick assessment. It's a 2-minute assessment. We'll basically measure your ability to impact the world with your story.
Okay, well, I love that. We'll put all that in the show notes, and people can find you on LinkedIn. And what is that the best URL for people, Mark?
Yeah, I mean, Mark Leruste, that's MarkLeruste.com is kind of where everything is linked back to.
Perfect.
So whether that's my podcast, the Storycast, the Glow in the Dark, all that stuff, you can go there. And yeah, LinkedIn is the only social media platform that I'm now currently active on. I
Yeah.
used to be on all over stuff like X and
Yeah.
Instagram, but I've just kind of doubled down on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
And
Place people
and I
go
like,
for business, I think.
yeah, it's the responsible adult of social media.
Yeah, exactly.
Or at least it was.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Well, so thank you very much for taking the time, Mark. And it's great to
Thanks,
see
brother.
you. And I certainly miss you. I'll look forward to, we'll have to have you back again in a little while and just see what's gone on and check in again. Cause, yes, it is a Kool-Aid party, but I'm okay with Kool-Aid parties like this because I know the difference that it's going to make,
Yeah.
and I love the saying, it's hard to be a prophet in your own hometown. So it's kind of nice to have you on my podcast telling people what I'm telling them all the time. And then when you put this out to your group, I will be backing you up, on all the things you say, because you are spot freaking on. And I just think that's good, because the more we can get people to tell their stories and connect, I think the better world we have.
Yeah. And there's a saying by Yaya Bakar who taught me this. He said, we need different messages for the same message. So I celebrate you, and I celebrate people who do, there's, Christina with a K on LinkedIn as well. Does this incredible work. And Amanda Baker said, there's so many people who do this great work as well. And I was going to say one last thing. I'm going to say this because you're not going to say it. Anybody watching this, listening to this, you should check, and I don't know if it's public or not, so maybe I'm doing a little faux pas, but you should check out John interviewing Seb in Dubai at the pool about his experience of working with John. And Seb is just like laying down the transformational experience of working with John. So if you've been thinking about working with John or reaching out to him, check out Seb's testimonial in a pool. You'll have to do with a little bit of skin and potential man nipple showing up in there once in a while, but it is totally worth it because the content is gold.
Oh, thank you, Mark. I got to go find that again. I know I posted that somewhere, but
just put the audio. If the video is too uncomfortable, just put the audio up.
yeah. I think we stayed pretty well in the pool there.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Cool,
and I'm a fan of yours. I'm glad you're in the world. Thank you for what you're doing. Thank you for joining us here on livelikealeader.show. And we'll have you back again.
Appreciate it, brother. Thank you.
And to all of you listening and joining us today, thank you for being here. We make no difference without the generosity of your listening. So thank you for listening. And please share the show. Please go to your favorite podcast app and give us 5 stars and, tell people about us to help us get the word out about this. And we will see you next time on livelikealeader.show.
Thank you for joining the Speak Like a Leader podcast. Go be awesome.